According to Ingarden, each literary work of art manifests four strata, as you probably all know much better than I. The stratum of the word sounds and sound complexes. Secondly, the stratum of meaning units, of word meanings, and higher order meaning complexes like the meanings of sentences. And thirdly, the stratum of the represented objectivities. So, for example, a novel also comprises all the persons, all the actions, all the events which are described in the novel, that are represented in the novel. And finally, the stratum Ingarden distinguishes of schematized aspects, that are the sequence of adumbrations in which the represented objectivities are given to the reader. Now, my topic here regards only part of the second stratum, namely Ingarden's account of the meanings of declarative sentences in literary works of art. The first, there are two of them which Ingarden distinguishes. He then forgets a bit his distinction, but he distinguishes two. The first of them he calls quasi-judgements. Quasi-judgements. They differ from real judgments, although they seem to be judgments. They look like judgments, or they look like propositions which assert some state of affairs. But they differ from judgments because judgments necessarily make a claim to truth. They make a claim to be adequate and to correspond to reality, to the real state of affairs. But this is the reason why, when he found that many of these statements are false, Plato called the poets liars, because they tell us false things. So Roman Ingarden's philosophy of the quasi-judgment, in a certain way, liberates the poor poets from the charge that they are all liars. And Ingarden, well, for example, comparing a real judgment, a judgment, with a quasi-judgment, you can say, if I say, for example, on the 8th of October 2018, we had beautiful and warm weather in Bregenz in Austria, and today we have the same kind of beautiful warm weather in Krakow. Then each of the words that I use expresses some concept, some meaning, but the whole sentence expresses a new order, a new level of meanings, namely an assertive or a judging proposition. And in and through this complex meaning unit of expressing the sentence, not only a state of affairs, that A is B or that A is not B, is sought or it's intended, but it is not only meant and intended, but it is judged. That is, it is affirmed that this state of affairs, which is conceived through the complex meaning units of the declarative sentence, is the case. It's really the case. Quite independently from my judgment, it obtains. Any judgment that has this kind of structure, that affirms a state of affairs, or that affirms a negative or a positive state of affairs, makes inevitably a claim to truth, because it makes a claim to be in conformity with the state of affairs that precedes and is independent of the acts of judging and of the judgment. And according to the principle of excluded middle, an important principle of logic, each proposition, each judgment must either be true or false. If the state of affairs it asserts actually obtains, the judgment is true. If it does not obtain, the judgment is false. Now, the quasi-judgment, Ingarden's central thesis in his philosophy of the literal work of art, regarding the meaning units, is that the meaning of a declarative sentence in literature, in the literary work of art, is precisely not a judgment. It does not assert that independently of the novel, Don Quixote went on such and such a day from his hometown to great adventures, and that he fought against the windmills. That is not asserted by Cervantes in the Don Quixote. Although it looks that he asserts, that he affirms all these events and deeds and adventures of Don Quixote. But Ingarden points out that all these sentences, which look like propositions, which look like judgments that such and such was the case, are, as a matter of fact, quasi-judgments, what he calls quasi-judgments. Now, quasi-judgments, well, let us say that Ingarden claims that almost all propositions, all declarative sentences, have the meaning of such quasi-judgments. And these quasi-judgments are not affirming that certain states of affairs are the case, they're not judging, they're not judgment, but they create, in a certain way, the whole world of fiction. All the personalities, all the characters, for example, of Don Quixote or Cervantes, all the adventures that occurred to him, all the actions he or Sancho Panza did, all the words they spoke, all of that is not affirmed that it existed actually, but the quasi-judgments create this whole universe of the represented objectivities of the novel. So in a certain way, it is creative of the fictitious world of the literary work of art. And Ingarden points out that this quasi-judgment only, as he puts it, shares the external habitus, kind of the form, the appearance of a judgment. But it is only as if it were a judgment. It is, so to speak, he even applies the theory of Weihinger, Kantian, of the as if philosophy of Weihinger to the literature. It is the affirmations of the literature of art are as if this and this took place. So the quasi-judgments do not judge that the world is such and such, but they serve to constitute or to create the fictional world. They serve, however, this creative purpose by evoking the impression that they affirm, that they judge about real events and actions and persons and so on. So one may say that they borrow, in a certain way, the form of judgment, of opposition, but give it a completely different meaning. And therefore, if somebody would say, it's not true, Don Quixote didn't move out of this, he didn't even live in that particular village to which Cervantes puts it, that would be quite off the point, because the novel doesn't have the task of describing an objective existing reality, but rather by borrowing somehow the habitus and the appearance of a judgment, of a proposition, it creates this world. So the confusion between a real judgment that affirms that something took place and the quasi-judgment that, so to speak, with the same habitus and appearance of the judgment creates that fictional world. This confusion is, for example, ridiculed in Cervantes' novel, Don Quixote, where Don Quixote makes havoc and smashes all the puppets of the theater, because these puppets in the theater that are representing evil magicians and evil knights, and he smashes them and destroys them because he takes them as if they were real evildoers. And he takes the judgments which they make as if they wanted to affirm in reality certain things which Don Quixote protests against. So one can say that if we do not accuse the poet of lying, and if we do not smash a theater in which some evil personages and actors speak, then we make the distinction between the quasi-judgment and the real judgment. So we may see that for example, in another novel, in Manzoni's I Promessi Sposi, the betrothed, maybe one of the most beautiful, Goethe thought it was the most beautiful novel ever written. And in this beautiful Italian novel, for example, Manzoni describes a whole lot of events. Don Abbondio, a very cowardly priest who is threatened by bravi in the service of a Don Rodrigo, and therefore this powerful man tells him that you will kill him if he presides over the wedding of Renzo and Lucia. And so all these events, we can say all these personalities, all these threats, all these cowardly priests, all these are created by the quasi-judgments that open the novel of Manzoni. But at the same time, we will see later that Manzoni also gives whole long historical and precise accounts of how this bad habit of having such criminal servants existed in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries in Italy, and how powerful they were. And there, he's like a historian. I will return to that. Now, we may express the nature of the quasi-judgmental meaning of declarative sentences in a novel or in other works of art by saying that through them something is affirmed, something is asserted, something is judged, but only not seriously. You can say, in a certain way, it is transposed into the real world through this quasi-judgment, but not really into the real world. It is as if it is somehow pretended, it is imagined, and the quasi-judgment sort of is building up this world of the literary cosmos. Well, one may say that the quasi-judgments are sufficiently similar to judgment so that if you read the novel, you think, you somehow can imagine you enter some of the world as if all these things were real, but it's not so. But now, this brilliant distinction of Ingarden, I think a very important distinction, I think seduced the great philosopher Ingarden to a number of errors. And the most basic one is what he claims to be the I quote, the quasi-judgmental character of all declarative sentences in the literary work of art. Now, to criticize this idea that all declarative sentences in the literary work of art are just such quasi-judgments, I first of all refer to Ingarden himself, who contradicts his own thesis, because Roman Ingarden distinguishes actually the quasi-judgments from what he calls apparent judgment, seeming judgment. And we may, somewhat expanding Ingarden's analysis, we may speak of at least three kinds of apparent judgments, which Ingarden does not explicitly distinguish. The first is judgments, sort of real judgment made by the fictional characters in a novel or in a work of art. We can say they possess the claims, the truth claim, or what they affirm, but they possess all these marks of the real judgment, so to speak, in the mode of the fictional world, in this as-if world. So one can say the persons who make such judgments in the novel and the literary life are not really living persons. So they are part of the represented objectivities. And in this imagined world, in this fictional world, they make real judgment. They may fight over them, they may say true things and fight over the truth and error and so on. So they don't make quasi-judgments that build up the world, but rather they, in a certain way, in the imaginary cosmos of the novel, of the literary art, they do actually make judgments. Judgments that can be judged true or false and so on. These apparent judgments, however, partake in the irreality of the represented character whose judgment they are. The merely apparent character of this judgment is due to the irreality of the subject who affirms this judgment. Don Quixote makes all this partly both wise and profound judgment, but he is not a real existing person. Now, secondly, so in that sense it's an apparent judgment because he is an apparent man, an apparent knight, as he puts it, the lowest of the noble profession of the errant knight, of which I am the lowest, the most modest. But anyway, so he is not really this person. And therefore, whatever he judges is not like a judgment affirmed by a really existing person. So in that sense, it's like an apparent judgment. But it is not a greater judgment, rather in the novel, it appears with all the characteristics of real judgment, except that it moves somehow within this imaginary world of the novel. So, not only in the novel there are such apparent judgment, but also by real persons. For example, if parents talk to their children about a fairy tale and say, yes, now soon the bad wolf will arrive and will eat grandmother, then they judge, if there is a judgment, but they judge about the fictional world of the novel. So in that sense, they can also make apparent judgment, even though they are real persons. But anyway, they do not judge about the real state of affairs, but they judge about imagined state of affairs. And that maybe is already leading us to a second meaning of apparent judgment. Namely, in a second sense, we can speak of apparent judgment not because the speaker is irreal and not a real being, but rather because the object about which he judges is not real, but is kind of a fictional world. Like when, for example, and these judgments are apparent judgments only if we sort of do not expressly, if we are not expressly aware that what we are speaking of is irreal. For example, I had a big discussion with one very close friend of mine who confused all kinds of literary works of art. And so I told him he cannot call Othello the Prince of Denmark, because the Prince of Denmark was Hamlet and Othello was not the Prince of Denmark. So here this is a judgment that in the two different dramas, the man who is the Prince of Denmark is Hamlet in the play of Shakespeare of Hamlet, and not Othello, who was Moor in the Venetian world. So from that, these are, I think, real judgments, but real judgments about fictional objects. But we can say in the fictional world, it's again different, because somehow the fictional characters speak of the fictional objects as if they were real, so, and therefore make apparent judgment in still another sense. But I will not perhaps go into the whole amount of these distinctions because I don't want to prolong the lecture endlessly. You can read it later. I can send it to you, but at the moment maybe just a brief comment. And the third sense of apparent judgment would be where apparently somebody makes a certain judgment, but actually he makes a completely different judgment. So for example, if somebody gives a very arrogant talk and he has the behavior of a proud man, and then as you stand up and say, I am very impressed by your humility and modesty, then your judgment seems to judge that he's very humble and modest, but in reality you imply, so to speak, the opposite. You say that only to make him aware and to make the other people aware that it was very arrogant. So we can say these are these apparent judgment in the first sense, namely of non-real person, are apparent because the subject that affirms the judgment is not real. Suppose that you read in Charlie Brown comic series. Charlie Brown says, someday we will all die, Snoopy. And Snoopy answers, true, but on all other days we will not. So here, for example, both Snoopy and Charlie Brown are not real persons in the affirmation, but they judge, and of course, if Snoopy says that it's true, then it is really true what Charlie Brown says, and if then Charlie Brown, if Snoopy answers, well, on all other days we will not die, it's also true. So both say something true, but these are somehow apparent judgment in the sense that they move within a fictional world of these comics. Charlie Brown. So we may say that also we may say that these apparent judgments which occur in a literal work of art must not be considered as if they were real judgment of the author, of the poet. For example, if Verdi composed this diabolical aria with the text of Iago, where he says, credo in un Dio crudel che m'ha creato simile a se, I believe in a cruel God who created me similar to himself, then we cannot say, that is Verdi's opinion. Verdi now judged that this is the case. No, this is a judgment which a fictional character, in this case a horrible, evil one, makes. Okay. Now, you may say that Ingarden's remark about apparent judgment may be particularly refers to the second meaning of apparent judgment, namely that there is a profound modification of a judgment if its object is not a real autonomous state of affairs, but if its object is, so to speak, a fictional world that is treated as if it were real in the literary work of art. So to say that these are not real judgment, but they are apparent judgment, is certainly an important distinction of Ingarden. So he distinguishes the real judgment from two different phenomena. From the quasi-judgment, which makes no claim of truth at all, but which creates the world, and from the apparent judgment, which in a certain way is quite similar to normal judgment, but moves within either from the side of the subject or from the side of the object in a fictional world, in a real world. Now, we can say that in this sense, certainly they appear in literary works of art, like in the Don Quixote, in my own new novel, In many novels there appear countless judgments that make claims to truth, but in this mode of apparent judgments of the fictional characters who make these judgments. Now, of course, we can see that Ingarden here commits, I think, another error. He claims that the apparent judgments, which are miserable judgments, but they can only speak of other imagined realities. In other words, the apparent judgments cannot move outside the literal work of art. They must be judgments about objects that are constituted by the quasi-judgment. And I think that is a big error. Because in my opinion, the judgments made in literal work of art can very well apparent judgments or real judgments by real persons, but they can of course be judgments about real things, about God and world, about real persons. Like, for example, in Ontology, there are many judgments in his literal work of art that refer to really existing historical personalities. Or in Solzhenitsyn, at the beginning of this Gulag Archipelago, he says that each thing he tells is a true story and happened, and he knows it, and he recorded all these horrible crimes committed by the communists against all these people who were in the Gulag. So here we can say we have judgments of either the narrator or of individuals who speak in the novel who refer not to other imagined objects but to real objects. And of course, there are many kinds, I would say there are many types of such real judgments in literary works of art. And Ingarden's thesis that all his apparent judgments in the literary work of art can only refer to constituted and mind-dependent objects constituted by the greater judgment, I think, is simply quite wrong. And how do I argue for this? I will here jump over very large parts of this lecture, but I think it would be almost an hour and a half long if I gave the whole lecture, and I think it might be too difficult to follow. Therefore, I will present the written text, but I will try to abbreviate it to the more essential point. So, we may say that real judgments, or that judgments about extra-fictional world, about the reality of the world, occur often in great works of art and in small works of art. And in the great work of art of Dante, for example, when he describes the entry of himself with Virgil to hell, then he reads the inscription over hell that says, "Through me one enters into the suffering city. Through me one enters into eternal pain. Through me one enters among the persons lost." And then Dante adds, "Lasciate ogni speranza voi che entrate." Abandon all hope, you who enter here. And although these two last sentences express exhortations and not judgment, but they nevertheless presuppose judgment. For example, the judgment that in hell there is no hope, or for example, the judgment that is despair and torment in hell last eternally, without end. So now I think if Ingarden had considered that more deeply, he would have rejected the error of claiming that no judgment can be contained in a literal work of art except a judgment about a fictional object. Now, therefore the crucial question that I want to treat in this lecture is Ingarden right when he claims that a literary work of art cannot contain any declarative sentences that express a real judgment of the real person of the author, or also a real judgment about real object. You remember the two meanings of apparent judgment, either that the subject that makes the judgment is not real, or that the object about which he speaks is not real. And so I sort of question both sides of the claim of Ingarden. Claim that not a real person, for example, the author, can make a judgment that is part of a novel, and secondly, that the judgment, also the apparent judgment that appear in a literary work of art, can only refer to a real fictional object. Now, certainly, there are many poems and literary work of art which speak not at all of fictional objects, but of real objects. For example, there's this very mysterious poem of Ingarden, very short, just 3 lines, which says, I translated from the German original, I am not mine, you are not yours, no one can be his own. I am not yours, you are not mine, no one can be someone else's. So here it's very mysterious to say what judgment that contains. Somehow that nobody can be simply his own without giving himself to somebody else, and yet we cannot give ourselves, as Boidiva says in his very profound treatise on the self-donation in his Love and Responsibility book, that the person is inalienable and we cannot belong to another person in the sense that we become like a possession of that person. So there's a specific personal sense of giving myself and me being yours and you being mine that is different from possession, from ownership. And I think this poem sort of expresses it. But here it's a little difficult to interpret which judgment Ingarden in this poem makes. But there are others that are very obvious. For example, by Andreas Gryphius, magnificent 3-line metaphysics of man and of time and of morality. He says, mine are not the years that time has robbed me of. Mine are not the years that perhaps are still to come. The moment is mine. And if I attend to it wisely, then he will be mine who made time and eternity. So this short kind of metaphysics of time and eternity and of morality, I think is certainly meant as a judgment about the truth, about the real thing, about the real, you can say the real flux of time and the unique kind of priority which the present moment has in our moral life over the past and the future, which we can not yet or no more change. So I think the idea that a poetic work, a literary work of art can only speak about other imagined, created, constituted objects, I think doesn't explain such thing. And of course, very precise historical accounts, like in Manzoni's The Betrothed, or in Solzhenitsyn, different novels of Solzhenitsyn, I think contradict this completely. There are very many historical information, and also in my own novel, there's a lot of information about the history of Liechtenstein, which are quite judgment about what really happened. There's also many information and judgment about the murder of the last Tsar, about the communist revolution, about the Nazi concentration camps, about the deeds of Maximilian Kolbe and of Edith Stein in the concentration camp, and so on. So, to speak of a Pole who has, in the first part of my novel, a crucial role is Jan Korczak, and his magnificent action with the children who were murdered by the Nazis, and whom he accompanied until death, although he was offered freedom and offered not to be killed. So here a novel can contain true stories, can contain historical facts, can contain, and it's not a whole. Now, I think there are also other judgments. Here, the truth of these statements we can know by the author telling us or by us knowing these facts from other sources. But that there are true judgments in literal works of art we can also know from considering the inner truth of certain judgments, the evidence, the self-evidence of these truths. And for these, my example is from Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. Then you will know probably the story of the Merchant of Venice and of the kind of greedy Jew Shylock and of how he wants to take out the heart of the Christian merchant, and he has everything according to the law, and he has signed that he will allow him to cut out the heart and so on. And before Portia brilliantly frees this merchant by telling the Jew that he can take out the heart. That's according to the law, and he has every right. And Shylock says, wonderful, the new David, the new Daniel of wisdom. And then he says, but there's no, in your contract, there's not one word about blood. And if you only pour one drop of blood of the merchant while you take out that pound of flesh near the heart, you will incur death penalty. Because there's another law in Venice that says if somebody freely violates the life of the head or sheds blood of the citizen, he must die. And so but before he comes to that text, to that sort of brilliant solution of the murderous lawsuit of the Catholic merchant, Portia tells the Jew that he should not be merciful. And he said, no, only justice. And then Portia gives this magnificent short speech on mercy and justice, which I want to read now. She says, the quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. His scepter shows the force of temporal power, the attribute to awe and majesty, wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings. But mercy is above the sceptre's sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself. And earthly power does then show likest God, when mercy seasons justice. Now, this brief text about the beauty of mercy and the unstrained and the relationship to justice is, I think, a kind of short metaphysical treatise and ethical treatise on justice and mercy and the dignity of kings and so on. And so it doesn't speak about other fictional objects and events of the drama. It speaks about the essence, the eternal essence of justice and of mercy. And so the idea that all the judgments, the apparent judgments in dramas must speak of other apparent realities and cannot speak of the truth of reality, I think is a mistake. Well, I think there are many other forms in which literary works of art can imply true judgments, real judgments. And one of them is found in the chorus of the ancient tragedies. Because we can say there are certain characters or certain institutions in a drama, in a literary work of art, which are treated by the poet as sort of oracles through the mouth of which the truth is revealed. And so, for example, there's this famous chorus that speaks in Antigone of Sophocles and says this marvelous thing about the nature of man that you all probably know. Wonders are many, and none is more wonderful than man. the power that crosses the wide sea, driven by the stormy south wind, making it pass under surges that threaten to engulf him. And earth, the eldest of the gods, the immortal, the unwearied, does he wear, turning the soul with the offspring of horses, as the ploughs go to and fro from year to year, and the light-hearted race of birds, and the tribes of savage beasts, and the sea brood of the deep, he snares in the meshes of his woven toils. He leads captive men excellent in wit, and he masters by his art the beast whose lair is in the wild, who roams the hills. He tames the horse of shaggy mane. He puts the yoke upon its neck. He tames the tireless mountain bull. And speech and wind with swift thought, and all the moods that mold his fate, has he taught himself. And how to flee the arrows of the frost when far lodging under the clear sky, and the arrows of rushing rain. Yea, he has resource for all. Without resource he needs nothing that must come. Only against death shall he call for aid in vain. But from baffling maladies he has devised escapes. And it goes on and on. But I think this whole prose is kind of a philosophical anthropology and a astonishment about the greatness of man, and it can be read as a philosophy contained in the drama of Sophocles. And so I think all of these texts and many other examples, I will not bother you with my own novel, that show that in the literature there can very well be judgments that pretend to be true and that are also really true. Also, if you think of the kind of literary works of art that include works of the Holy Scripture, like there are many such works of Dante and many others, then you can say that, or Lopez de Vega's Rose Theatre, for example, there you can say that certainly these are in a certain way sacred poetry that is like a sermon on drawn from the Bible to teach the listeners of the truth. And the same is true about the play Jedermann that we have every summer in Salzburg, and that draws crowds and crowds. It's always sold out since 70 or 80 years every summer. And this is a medieval play that Hofmannsthal, an Austrian poet of the last century, has revised, has rewritten from the point of language. And it's a fantastic, I always say, it's much a better sermon than all the sermons of the bishops and priests of Salzburg together, because it's fantastic on the last things, on death, on sin, on justice, on mercy, on mercilessness, and so on. And so it's full of judgment about reality, and not just about fictional events. Well, it's maybe enough to be said. In my novel, I also have certain devices of how to show the reader that many things the devil says in my novel, because my novel is called Third Temptation of God, or the Gospel of the Devil, and it is the Satan's visit in Liechtenstein, where he explains the third temptation, the temptation where he showed Christ all the reigns of the world and told him that he will give them to him if he falls down and adores him, worships him. And two of my most brilliant students, two white Russian students whom I had and who were grown up without religion and without Christianity, Jewish students, they tried to read often with me the Gospel. We read in my office out of the classroom just to read the New Testament. And so when we came to the temptations of Christ to the devil in the desert, they asked me a question. That was the cause why I wrote this novel. And they said, how is it possible, how can it be defended that the devil is said to have tempted Christ in the desert, while in the same chapter, the demons whom Jesus drives out of the possessed say, we know who you are the Son of the living God. So how can the devil try to tempt Christ to sin if he knows that Christ is God, is the Son of God? And so this is a very difficult question, almost impossible to answer. And so a large part of the first part of my novel is more like a epic kind of, it goes into many different stories or short stories, and what might a bit like Don Quixote, there are many beautiful short novels inside the novel. But the second part is like a drama of this encounter of the devil with men. And so here I try to show that many of the things the devil says there, also to Jesus, because he develops this sort of temptation. He explains what are these three kingdoms, and it then sort of culminates in the reign of love, which he, against his whole inclinations, wants to show Jesus, to seduce him, that he could marry the young girl Maria Magdalena and could save her from prostitution, and he could create a new paradise, and he could create a marvelous reign of love, and the preceding, that he could do justice, he could undo all the injustice if he accepted the devil's offer to be the king and the prince of the world, which the devil himself prides himself of being, and God in the gospel says that he is the prince of this world, and that he can give him the power over all the kingdoms, and then Christ can undo all the famines, all the hunger, all the thirst, all the injustice, all the exploitation, all the raping of women and so on. And then the devil says to Christ, and you want to judge on the last day men by saying, I was hungry and you didn't feed me, I was thirsty and you did not give me to drink, and so on. And you could, if you follow my offer, you could do all these things. And if you do not do them, if you do not accept my power and this reign of justice, then you are guilty, and I, with the rest of humanity, will accuse you in front of the last judgment, that you have sinned against your own principles. And so, and then Jesus answers him and tells him how many things he said were quite true, but how other things were quite false, and how he sort of is still a liar from the beginning. So there's this dialogue. But in this dialogue, I think it's obvious that many of the things the devil says in this temptation are quite true. And so to find where the horse hoof appeared in his speech is not so easy. And so I think in the literature of art we can not only have true judgment in the mouth of the whole scripture quotations and so on, but also in the mouths of demons, in the mouths of evil people, in the mouths of whatever, terrible criminals. So now you have to learn German and then buy it, but I will try to have it translated also into other languages. Good. Well, I think there are many other things one could say about the presence of real judgments in the literature of art. For example, also one distinguishes the kind of persona, the kind of created irreal narrator, and I think Ingarden is right, that the narrator in many novels is itself a fictional personality that that is used, that so to speak, is an object created somehow by the novelist and not a real person. But I try to say that there's also a kind of transcendent narrator or author who can make real judgment and not only, so to speak through this invented character of the narrator and so on. So I think there are many more points I could make to show wherein and why I think that Ingarden, in spite of his enormously fruitful and profound discovery, has fallen into certain errors. But I will, I think, end, it's now more or less 1 hour, the lecture, and I have heard from others that it would be good to reserve like half an hour for a discussion. Yeah. And so I think maybe I wanted to use other examples from Brothers Karamazov and from other novels of Dostoyevsky and so on. But I think maybe what I have said thus far is sufficient to justify my attempt to mainly to say that while Ingarden's discovery and admirable analysis of the greater judgments on the one hand and of the apparent judgments on the other hand throws a lot of light on literature and on the nature of literature, I think then he, so to speak, from these discoveries, being a little bit too enthusiastic about his discoveries, he sort of eliminated other truths about literature and the manifold role which actual judgments play in literature. And many, I didn't deal with all of these, but there are many methods and sources and devices to which the novelist or the author of a drama can, so to speak, include real judgment about the world and about things in the literary work of art. And maybe that gives you a certain impulse to study the question more deeply. And as I said, I published also 2 articles on these questions before, on Ingarden and this particular problem. And I can send these and also the new one, which I composed for this honor of giving the Ingarden lecture in, so to speak, the hometown of Ingarden. And then maybe we can once have a seminar of a few days in which these questions are deepened and discussed with the Philosophy Institute on another occasion. I would be glad to return to this beautiful place or to invite the seminar to Gamming, where I now live in Austria, where we have a huge former Carthusian convent and the campus of the Franciscan University of Steubenville, and where also during the summer the building is free and we can make big events. We had a meeting for Hildebrandt Schülerkreis a few months ago there, where people from all the world came and we had intense philosophical discussions. And so maybe here, maybe there, maybe elsewhere, it would be lovely to deepen this whole topic with you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. As you said, we have time for discussion. First, I would like to defend Ingarden because he has a very poor experience as a writer. He had also Ingarden. He wrote a few stories, but they are not published yet, and we have no permission to publish since they are very bad. So, it's you are an experienced author. So I think it's this experience might be a point of departure to criticism of Ingarden.
And you find him bad?
I didn't read it. So
you know it?
No, it's hidden in archives. So. Okay, we have time for discussion, for question, commentaries, and so on. So please feel free to.
The fact that they were not published is not a proof that they are bad. As you know, the novel of this Harry Potter
was considered
rejected 32 times. I don't think it's such a good novel, but it was rejected from 30 or more publishers, and the author didn't give up. And she continued to ask editors, and finally found one that didn't think that it was bad, as all the other 30 editors said. And then it was a world success. I think not deserved. I think my novel is better than Harry Potter. But anyway, the mere fact that it was rejected by the editorials is not a proof.
There are Ingarden family which prohibited.
I would be interested to see what his novels are.
Okay, let's start.
Some other philosophers wrote novels. Kant wrote a novel.
Kant?
Yeah, Kant wrote a novel that nobody knows, and I think it must be really bad. But I mean, and of course Sartre, and he got a Nobel Prize for his literary work. So I mean, it's an old tradition that somehow philosophers write short stories or novels. And the fact that Ingarden did that, which I didn't know, is for me very interesting news. And I would like to, if it's in English or French or Italian or Spanish or German, I would like
in Polish.
I would like to read some of that.
So perhaps the first question would be, since you discussed this relation between philosophical text and the literary work, then perhaps what would be your analysis of Boethius's De Consolatioone Philosophiae? Because this is probably one of the first texts that really binds both kind of novel-like writing and a philosophical treatise. It's actually both, because Boethius creates a protagonist, creates a persona, Vis Philosophia, and then has a whole kind of event and the fictional world in which they discuss real truth. So perhaps it's a kind of a good reference point, and I would be interested in hearing how you would analyze it, whether it's a good argument, whether it's a good example for you, and it contradicts Ingarden, or whether it's...
in what? It contradicts?
Ingarden's quasi-judgements theory, or it doesn't?
In a certain way it does, because Ingarden makes this claim, surprising claim, because he has such a rigorous analysis of the quasi-judgment and also of the real judgment. So it's, to me, it's surprising that he, in my opinion, commits a few rather serious errors by sort of absolutizing his discovery. That's a constant temptation of each philosopher. Once you discover something, you easily interpret everything in the light of this discovery, and then you go wrong. And so I think, but nevertheless, it's right. But it's all in a certain way contradicts, because he doesn't admit the kind of philosophical substance of literary works of art and the real judgments that appear in different forms in literary works of art.
So would he be?
But if he wrote also unpublished literary works, maybe you can tell me by reading them, you can prove that what I attribute to him on the basis of his book, The Literary Work of Art, is not quite adequate. And so that my having written a novel doesn't contradict Ingarden necessarily, maybe. And also, Ingarden wrote a very interesting article, the so-called truths of the literary work of art. And that I should have also considered in the lecture. That's also a very interesting topic, maybe if one's the university, the Jagiellonian University, will organize a congress on Ingarden's philosophy of the literary work of art and of related topics. maybe also this article could be studied. And so maybe, so to speak, the kind of contradiction that I felt in both in studying in the past his literary work and then writing myself a novel. Maybe it's much less big than at first one thinks. Maybe you can help to show that Ingarden admits all these things in different modes.
I have a question. Unless you sustain a belief in an external world, you can proclaim that all judgments are quasi-judgements, and that might be an Ingardenian interpretation of what Derrida says when he says inevitabilities, which would be to say that what we say to each other as fictitious as things that are being written in novels. So how would one distinguish stories that we tell ourselves about real life from stories that are told in books? That's the first question. The second one, okay, well, so like skipping that idea that everything is narrated, it's very interestingly that distinction that you brought out asks a very important question: what are aesthetic judgments? They would be apparent judgments, and that really calls into question what literary critics or art critics do, because they are pronouncing about apparently non-existing worlds. And finally, what you were talking about, which is very interesting, you brought up by historical fiction. I think 2 years ago, Hilary Mantel had read lectures for the BBC, and she was bringing up that in those issues of truth, and often made claim that novelists or poets say that there is a truth that a novel expresses, regardless.
There's a truth.
Well, the novelists or literary artists often make a claim that the fictitious or even a completely imaginary work expresses some truth, or a work of fiction that emerges not really from the sentences, but from the truth of the novel, the so-called truth of the novel, or whatever it is, of a poem or a painting. And that is another interesting thing that is, interestingly brought up by the distinction that you're making.
It's, I think, a very rich topic, this whole question of the relationship between truth and literary works of art. By the way, here I should add that Ingarden at first defines literary work in such a way that also newspaper articles and all kinds of texts which are not literary works of art belong to literature. And so, but then he introduces somewhere in paragraph 25 a much narrower, of this literary work of art, a much narrower concept of the literary work itself, and identifies it with the literary work of art. And so that's also an interesting question. But I think the relationship between truth, that whole notion of the poetic truth, or is of course very kind of manifold. I only treated in this paper a small part of the problem, namely whether there are real judgments that make a claim to truth and it can be true or false in literary works of art. And I argued that in many different ways that can be the case. Ingarden claims that there are all quasi-judgments, and that if there are apparent judgments, then they can only refer to other fictional objects. So I try to answer that particular aspect. But of course, there are other meanings of truth. There are many meanings of truth. There was a big book on truth and person, in which I deal with ontological truth, ontological truth, cognitive truth, the truth of the judgment, and so maybe these three. But there are also other possible meanings of truth, like poetic truth, truth of literature, truth and beauty, and so on. So that I think certainly, for example, the representation or the characterization in a literal work of art of reality as it is. For example, that the evil is presented as evil and not praised and kind of glorified, like our horrible Nobel Prize winner of literature in Austria, a woman who is absolutely dreadful, had a kind of diabolical vision of all things, and I think he did that. But I mean, if you see the great poets, then you could say that in the way in which, so to speak, everything is shown as it is, the good as good, the evil as evil, the mean as mean, the funny as funny. I mean, it's suddenly a truth peculiar to art, which is not just reducible to the true judgments which can be found in later works of art. So I think that is a very rich topic, and I'm very glad that you have an interest in it, and maybe you can persuade your professor here and Pavel that they will organize a whole seminar of a few days on these questions. Maybe if you can speak a little loud, because I'm a little deaf, not quite deaf. And the battery of my hearing aid is so small that nobody anymore has it. So I don't have it anymore. It's so tiny, the battery is so tiny, and apparently people decided not anymore to produce it. So if you can speak a little distinct and a little loud, that would be good.
Yes, I will try. So thank you for your talk. I myself don't know much about Ingarden, but the problem is very interesting to me. And it just came to my head that Albert Camus, in his book, I think the title is La Plague in I don't know how it is in English. The Plague. Albert Camus. He has this motto. Yes, this motto that it is common to say something through saying something else, and I think that it is maybe generally, if you write a book, even a fiction or novel, you want to say something about the actual world, so that the book has some value, so to say. And I think that it is quite intuitive to me to draw this distinction between what is asserted in the world of fiction, the world presented, and concerns the particular events of the fictional world, and what is kind of this literary value of the book, that the book wants to say about the actual world. So I think, I don't know if it's true, but it came to my head that you can draw this distinction if, for example, some character says something about the, well, maybe I shouldn't say concrete, but particular events that are part of the fiction, then, well, the criteria of truth of such assertion are, of course, not to be taken from the real world. But it seems that those general abstract truths, like about the morality or something general, are kind of incorporated to the fictional world from the reality, so to say. So it seems to me that this distinction is very intuitive. Like, I think that I would always know from which word to take the criteria of truth. But it may be just my illusion.
Well, it's very good and very interesting what you say. I don't see as a contradiction to what I said. Or still you want to refute me?
Well, no, I just don't see it as a puzzle. Or, yes, like very problematic that some sentences, fictionary sentences, are both in fiction but about the general world.
Yeah. Well, I think this reminds me of a part of my lecture which I have not read, which deals with some of the things you are saying. Namely, if we consider so to speak judgments about reality as part of the literary work of art, then I think we do not only have to consider those that are made, that are found in the literature, either in imagined characters that appear in the literature or by the narrator or by the author. But I think there are certain judgments which emerge from, or cognitions which emerge from a good literary work, which could be put into some kind of form of judgment, but they emerge from the way in which certain things are described. And I think in this respect, for example, particularly, I mean, if you speak of the ethical dimension of literary works, then to present the noble in its nobility, the mean and the ugly and the evil or the devilish in its evilness, that is certainly a part of the truth that can emerge from a literary work, but not a deeper question than just a question of whether there are certain true judgments actually found in the literary art. It's sort of true judgments that are born in the reader or the listener when he experiences that literary work of art. That he has, so to speak, then to confess these truths which the literary work of art just kind of elicits in him in a certain way. And I think that is certainly a very important relationship between literature and truth. But of course, for example, the text from Shakespeare is on mercy and justice. I think there are also quite a few texts, and there the poet can, or the writer, can put somehow philosophical insights into the mouth of one of the characters who are speaking. And then, so to speak, these texts take on not just the description that this particular character in this comedy or in this novel said these things. They create the apparent judgments made by the different characters in the figure, but then, so to speak, these judgments and they become true expressions of insights which the poet in a certain way presents to the listener. So I give an example. I wrote a book on philosophizing, on entertaining philosophy, and that's a kind of interpretation of a great Austrian comedy writer called Johann Nestroy, who has, I think, countless observations in the different comedies that have very a great philosophical truth to them. And one can develop, so to speak, these insights from the evidence that what these particular characters say is not only what the author, in this case Nestroy, so to speak, wants to be understood as his own observation, but rather at his own judgment, but rather that one can see the truth, and then we come to the judgment that it is so. And I give one of the examples I give is a fantastic text on the stupidity I can try to, because I have a good translation of it. And I think the chapter of my book on Nestor's philosophy of stupidity is maybe one of the best, and I compare it also to Thomas Aquinas' philosophy of stupidity, and it's very similar. And there is this text, which I want to read to you as an example from a comedy that is, I think, an example of philosophical insights which can be contained also in very witty form in a comedy. So, for example, here, this comedy is called Against Stupidity, or Against Foolishness. There is no remedy. And in this, there is a foolish or stupid man, and his brother is very smart and intelligent and reasonable. And he speaks with a poet in this comedy, and he tells the poet that I have a very stupid brother, but it's not a big problem, because my brother is very stupid, but I am so intelligent, and so what he lacks in intelligence, I can provide to my prudence and wisdom. And there the poet said, you would be right if stupidity were a weakness of mind, but unfortunately it is a most terrible strength. It stands unmoved like a rock, even when a whole ocean of reason dashes its waves against it. A flippant character disposed to evil was often cured by the soft breath of love, more often by the rough winds and storms of experience. And even vices have often fled from the light of better convictions. Only stupidity has fenced itself off behind a firm bulwark of stubbornness. When attacked, it sticks out the pointed knives of maliciousness, and thus stands invincible. Sad but true is the proverb, against stupidity even gods would fight without success. And you, miserable mortal, want to take upon yourself this gigantic battle? So here, then comment with many texts of Thomas Aquinas that this type of stupidity of which Nestor speaks in his comedy is not the only one. In fact, Nestor distinguishes many different meanings and types of stupidity. But this particular evil kind of stupidity is also one that Thomas Aquinas writes very similar things. The relationship to pride, to stubbornness, to the resistance of the light of reason and the light of truth and so on. So I think in that sense there are many texts which really have a very philosophical substance that you can draw out of the literary work.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Of course you can ask.
So it just came to my head Dostoyevsky's Brothers Karamazov.
Yeah.
And there is this famous talk between, I believe it was brother Ivan and Dmitri, and they argue about whether there is God or there isn't.
What?
Whether there is God in heaven.
There is God.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
between Alyosha and
maybe. And Ivan says that there is not God, and Alyosha, of course, says that there is God.
Yes.
And those two assertions, or they seem to not concern that much the world of fiction of the Karamazov brothers' fiction, but the real world, where there is really is going on. And if they were taken to be about world, about our actual world, then there would be kind of contradiction between those two. So, well, of course, from the, I think that from the whole book that it is clear that the Ivan's judgment is wrong, false, and the Alosha's judgment is right or maybe better. But it seems to me that there can be those, how he said, the actual apparent judgments that are contradictory also.
Yeah.
In the book. I don't know if it's problematic.
I'm not quite sure whether I understand you correctly, but certainly in this debate between Alyosha and Ivan about the problem of theodicy, and Ivan's claim that even if God exists and even if heaven exists, he will return the entrance ticket to heaven, because God does not answer how he can permit the abuse of children and the evil acts against children. He gives this 3 or 4 incredibly horrible examples of people who mistreat children. And Ivan's point is the fundamental question of theodicy. How can God be good if he does not interfere, and if he is omnipotent and doesn't interfere with such horrible things? I think I wrote a long book on theodicy question, on this question, in the attempt to answer this Ivan's claims. And I think, of course, it's very interesting because this Ivan's atheism is in a certain way based on an absolute ethical truth, because he, so to speak, accuses God of doing evil by not acting and by not preventing his abuses of his children. So, first of all, it's very interesting that it is a kind of a defense of the absoluteness of truth against God. That God too is bound by this absolute ethical truth. And if he acted against them, he would be evil as well. So that's very interesting from the point of view of epistemology and metaphysics and ethics. But I think that the Ivan's position, and in general the similar positions which are many contemporary atheists who basically use in much less poetic language the same type of argument as Ivan proposes to Alyosha, I think that the kind of analytic, philosophical statement of this argument of Ivan is if the existence of evil is incompatible with the existence of God. Because God is all good, otherwise he will not be God. God must be omnipotent, otherwise he will not be God. And evil exists, and between these 3 propositions there is a logical contradiction. Because if God is omnipotent, he has all power to eliminate all good, all evil. So he cannot be omnipotent and good if he does not eliminate all evil. And so the existence, the reality of evil includes God. But I think this argument is, of course, impressive. It's also the part of this diabolical speech of my new novel, where the devil accuses God of not following his invitation to a kingdom of justice. But I think it is of course, it in a certain way is a kind of rationalistic overlooking of many other possible meanings of suffering. So to speak, for example, it doesn't really ask the question whether even unjust sufferings can have a meaning, and what are the different meanings of suffering. I mean, some of them can, of course, be to be a punishment. Some can, of course, be I mean, in the case of Christ, the most innocent suffering, we believe that his innocent suffering was freely accepted in expiation of sin. So this whole value of expiation, the whole value of atonement for the evil of sin. All of these possible meanings and all of these possible values linked to suffering are completely eliminated by this type of atheism. And they only concentrate, so to speak, on one very shallow aspect of the whole question of evil. Also, they do not concentrate, for example, on the much greater evil in a moral evil. They just concentrate on suffering, but they don't at all consider the whole sphere of, for example, moral evil or sin. And therefore, if you understand that there is an evil that is much greater than simply the evil of suffering, then you get a completely new perspective, also by the manifold relationship between moral evil and suffering. And of course also the freedom, the high value of freedom. I mean, if God were to completely fix all the problems of evils in the world, there would be, in a certain way, the respect for the great value of freedom, of angels and men, includes a certain risk that in the abuse of this free will, evils will be committed. But if God were, so to speak, eliminate all the evils, then he would also eliminate some of the freedom and the dignity of the persons they possess by being themselves responsible of whether they use their free will well or not. And so there are many aspects, I think, of the problem of suffering, the problem of evil, which this type of Ivan-like atheism overlooks.
Well, I put a footnote for you, just tell me what you're saying. Two those questions are profoundly explored by Jagiellonian, the question of theodicy in his
You also can speak a little louder.
Okay. I'm saying that those questions, just three footnotes to what you were saying, those questions are profoundly explored by Jagiellonian in his If There Is No God, and in Josef Seifert in Zdalnego. Those are, I mean, the Jagiellonian's book is exploring that dilemma. And in Josef Seifert's long essay, Zdalnego. And about your quote from the comedy, Szymborska has this nice poem called Hatred. Who? Szymborska. Sława Szymborska, not the Polish book. Which is apparently a praise of hatred. Done very nicely. Ostensibly, it's praise of hatred, showing how stupidity is just like everybody. So it's worth considering those things.
Thank you for your excellent talk on this. From what I know, there is the distinction of evil. There is the physical evil, that is suffering, and the moral evil, that is sin, and so on.
There are many evils. In my theodicy, I say that the evil, the modern atheists based on evil, just only considers for most part suffering, evil of suffering, of hunger, of thirst, of pain. But the moral evil is practically totally excluded. But also the evil which Descartes thought to be the greatest of all evils, namely error. So there must be somehow a theodicy of addressing all these evils, not just suffering and pain, but also error, which in a certain way is a greater evil than pain, and also the evil of the moral evil.
Perhaps you could give the title of your book, Woman God in Auschwitz.
Yes.
Yeah, you know the title of my theodicy book.
Yes, Woman God in Auschwitz.
Where was God in Auschwitz?
It means that you need to deliver a lecture, next lecture about theodicy.
Yes.
I As you see, it's debated and discussed.
Yeah, very nice to have another opportunity, be it in Austria or be it in Krakow, to continue the dialogue.
Any questions?
I have one final question, very short. The way I
the final will be mine.
Yeah, okay, sure, sorry. But I have just one intuition. It seems to me that arts have their objects. Each art has some kind of an object. Let's say sculpturing, it deals with this which is spacious and at the same time sensible. You can empirically experience it. The art of painting deals with colors in the spatial order, right? And I would say that the art of philosophy has also its proper object, and the proper object would be the abstract truth about the world. Now, it seems to me that literature does not really have its proper object, because the truth doesn't have its proper object. Literature. Yes, because art of like paintings have something to say about, let's say, colors that no other art can say. Sculpturing shows something about the relations in the spatial world which no other art can show. Philosophy can discuss the abstract truth, and literature is it deals with the same thing as philosophy, but it adds concrete form to it, which is unnecessary. You might express these things in an abstract form. So it seems to me that literature is in a way redundant. It's not sui generis. It doesn't have its own object.
So she wants to offend my new novel.
I'd rather to praise your philosophy.
Well, I think we could of course also say that literature somehow includes all the other things. You can have literary accounts of music, of paintings, of philosophical debates, of philosophical questions like in the Brothers Karamazov and in many others. And for example, another mixture of philosopher and literary writer was Gabriel Marcel, a great friend of mine whom I knew very closely in Paris, where I studied for a while. And he, for example, his plays are quite overlapping also with philosophical questions. The famous line in one of his plays is "Aimer quelqu'un, c'est lui dire tu ne mourras pas." To love someone means to tell him you will never die. And this relationship between love and immortality, and the whole question, we developed in many philosophical writings, but of course also in literary. So here you have, I think, the possibility that literature also includes, on the one hand, philosophy can deal with all of them. Philosophy can also be a philosophy of literature, a philosophy of music, a philosophy of fine art, of painting, and so on. In fact, it's very interesting part of aesthetics, the philosophy of the different arts, and what are their language and what are the values, the particular aesthetic values entrusted to the different kinds of art. But on the other hand, also literature can say that they are vaster because they can speak of everything and include in their literary works all other things as well, including philosophy. So it's difficult. And there's the famous debate between Leonardo da Vinci and some literary figure. And Leonardo da Vinci argues that painting is by far the supreme art. And one of his arguments is that if in a literary work you were to say all the things you can gather in a painting, you would need your whole life, and you could not describe all the things that the painter can convey. Thus, the painting can show all of that simultaneously, and in literature you have to read chapter after chapter and so on. So there are many, I think it's very interesting because there are many kind of points of view under which you can put one art above the other. But I'm, of course, as philosopher, delighted if you say that philosophy is superior to literature, but as a author of a novelist, I want to defend also literature.
When you think about Horace's definition, you said the purpose of literature is to give an emotional content to revelation.
But still the object is...
The object is your emotions. It's your experience, it's generating experience.
No, but the object, that's the form of the act, the object.
Is that the object? To make you move, to make you like, that's the thing that the philosopher doesn't need to do.
I'd like to ask a final question, I think. It's about, for Ingarden, all the debate about literary works, the analysis of literary works, was a kind of exercise for the most important debate, namely the struggle between idealism and realism. And his final work about this debate on the existence of the world incorporates some of his ideas developed for literary works. And my question is, do you see any consequences or implication for your account for literary work for the other debates in philosophy? I mean, because for me, every kind of theory about creativity, of human creativity, is also a hidden or implicit theory of philosophy of God. I mean, there is an analogy between making an object of arts and making a creative of the world in God's case. So do you see any links between your analysis and a philosophy of God, or the problem of realism, the debate with idealism, and so on? It's only an analysis of just done for this particular case.
Well, I mean, the question of idealism and realism, you can say, was some of the inspiring idea for Ingarden to write the literal part, because in this kind of way, that judgment in which the literary world is built up and is a purely intentional object, that proceeds from conscious acts, human acts, he called some of the type of worlds that the German idealists and even the later Husserl, whom he criticized, regarded as they interpreted the real world somehow in the light of the purely intentional objects as we truly find them in the work of art. So I think Ingarden's attempt to analyze the type of constitution of this fictional world and the case where indeed we have objects that are wholly dependent on our conscious acts. It was for him somehow to be connected with his book, The Streit um die Wirklichkeit der Welt, the fight about the real world, in which he defends the anti-idealist position. And I think that is an aspect of literary art which I did not deal with here, but which I think is an important point. Somehow the non-reducibility of the real world to just purely intentional objects that are created by human consciousness and by quasi-judgment or by other kinds of conscious mind. So that's of course a big topic that could be related. Now if you relate it to God and to creation, divine creation, of course you could say that also both the analogies and the differences between human creativity and human creation, limits that it has, but also the dignity, somehow the ability to create a whole world of a novel, of a great work of art, has both analogies and distinctions between divine creation. So, for example, to work out the creation of beings from nothing, of real beings, of spiritual beings like the human soul or the angelic spirit, is of course somehow analogous to the creativity of man in art, but at the same time there is profound differences by the fact that the real beings of the world cannot be created by the man, and that the artist also somehow always uses and presupposes already a whole lot of pre-given data. So the idea of the creation from nothing is of course again profoundly different from human creativity, but to point out the analogies and the differences between the two, for example, that would be another, of course, interesting topic inspired by Ingarden's little work of art and by Streit die Wirklichkeit. So we have to have many more seminars.
Okay.
If somebody wants to continue to speak, I would be very happy to do so by eating something somewhere, because since my very short breakfast I have not eaten anything.
Okay,
and so now it's already 6 o'clock. So
okay.
A little early for eating dinner, but something, maybe we can go somewhere and continue the conversation, if some of you like.
This is a latest tradition of symposium. Okay, thank you very much.